Okay, so welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to start this second day of the Summer Training School of the International Master Degree in Security and Human Rights at the University of Tuscia. This morning, the 1st of July, we have the pleasure to host a lecture by Professor Luca Galli. Luca is a researcher of administrative law at the University of Milan, where he holds the course of digital transition proceedings and drafting of public administration documents. Luca has received his PhD in administrative law with a thesis on human rights protection before administrative judge at the University of Milano Bicocca, and he has already written 2 monographs. Notwithstanding the young age, so we're really happy to have Luca with us this morning to deal with a key topic: procedural fairness and non-discrimination and private sponsorship schemes for humanitarian admission. And he will illustrate the case of Canada in particular. I know that some of you are working on this case study for the training session, so that might be very, very useful as well for the afternoon plenary session. So thank you very much for being with us today. I leave the floor to Luca, and of course it's always the same way we did yesterday. He is going to speak for 1 hour, roughly 1 hour, and then there is going to be half an hour debate. So Luca, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Daniela. Hi, and thank you to everybody for being here. It's the 1st of July, as Daniela says, so it's getting hotter and hotter. And staying in a class or even at home without air conditioning, as I am, could be really hard. So thank you so much. I hope that I'm not gonna be boring too much, but I'll try to do my best. Let me share my screen. Like I cannot. Like they told me, Daniela, they told me I cannot. No, now I can. So super cool. Now, let me see what I can do. I can share my screen and I'm gonna pop up. Here we go, my PowerPoint presentation, which should be already online. Can you see it, guys? Just a nod, yes, no?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, Professor.
Okay, as you can see, I just twisted a little bit the title of our lecture, not mine, it's our lecture, so we're gonna do it together. Right now it's just due process and, well, due proceeding or fair proceeding in private sponsorship of refugees program. The case of Canada through the lens of Italy. So what we're gonna deal with today is the application of due process and fair proceeding in relation to one of the most famous and like historically first private sponsorship program of refugees, which is the Canadian one. In order, well, I do, sorry, Daniela chose me to speak about Canada, not because I'm Canadian, but I'm like fully Italian, because I spent like a year and a half in Canada studying the private sponsorship of refugees. But even if I stayed there for a bit and like people there were lovely and they loved me very much, like I think that speaking as an Italian of a Canadian system, so a different system, would be just an excess of hubris. So I decided to read the Canadian situation according or through the lens of the Italian private sponsorship program, which is well known, I hope, probably like you already know, you have already started, and it's called like humanitarian corridors. That's really important because we can highlight the difference and so better understand how the Canadian system works in comparison to the Italian one, and how due process, both like under the like judicial point of view and the administrative point of view, is applied in Canada and is enacted in Italy. So, like generally speaking, well, I share with you just like few information, like a couple of articles. One of them is terrible because it's mine, and it also is in Italian. So I don't know how many of you could understand it, but like there is ChatGPT and DeepL and all the translation app that could help you. But there's also another shorter article in English which just explain broadly, like give you a broad overview on the Canadian private sponsorship of refugee system. I would add, maybe you can also keep on seeing my screen, another wonderful lecture. This is a book. I would have loved to share with you this book, but I don't know how about like Daniela would take about the violation of copyright since it's on payment online, but I have like a PDF version because Shona Labman was like a person I studied with in Canada. Is Strangers to Neighbor, Refugee Sponsorship in Context, which is like a book with like the contribution of several authors, which give you a full understanding of the Canadian system and like all both like the strengths and the flaws of that characterize this system. So if you are interested in the Canadian system and if you want to give a further reading, this is a good book to start with. Going back to the presentation, last thing to say, I will try just like to ask you a few questions. I know that it's horrible when it's like an online presentation, and so I can look at you in your eyes and speak with you like easily, but I'll try to do my best. And in any case, if you have question or like whatever, if you want to speak and say that I'm doing something really wrong and I'm boring, and if you want like 5 minutes of pause, just interrupt me and I will be ready to reply to you, speak with you, and like stop my presentation. So keep on going. What we have to say that, well, Canada is, well, like the private sponsorship of refugees in Canada is a well-renowned system all around the world and is seen generally as a system to be inspired with. There are like several sources that say that the Canadian system is a model of inspiration for private sponsorship and even community sponsorship, even if private and community sponsorship are like two different things. Like the first source come from Canada itself, since in 2006, 2015, 2016, Canada with UNHCR and other organizations, academics and not, started the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative in order to scale up, in order to allow a replication and the spread of like the Canadian model of private sponsorship of refugees. But apart from like the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative, there are several sources that recognize how the Canadian system could be a model to be exported and replicated in other legal systems, in other nations. We can see here like the webpage of the Ministry of Interior of Italy, which say that like we should work together with Canada to export their like wonderful model of refugees acceptance and integration. Well, on the other hand, we must take into account that pure replication of the Canadian system could not work as good or as bad, we will see as it is working in Canada. So any sort of exportation of a model should take into account the specific features and the specific characteristic of each country, of each legal system, of each context of immigration that characterize each nation. And in any case, like looking at the Canadian model as a perfect model to completely replicate might be wrong. We should like focus on it and we should learn both from its strengths and its flaws. Indeed, that the Canadian system might have some flaws could be represented that the fact that not only Canada say that Canada is a good model to be replicated, Italy say that Canadian model could be replicated, but other states, United States, President Trump say that Canada could be an inspiration for immigration plan. So like we should better like focus on this Canadian system, understand the strengths, understand the flow, and try so to do some cherry picking in order, if you want to do a scale up, of the private sponsorship of refugee in other country, and also like do this cherry picking in order to focus on the strength and overcome the flaws that characterize this Canadian system. Well, in reality, refugee resettlement in Canada, it's a more complicated system. It's not based only on the private sponsorship of refugee programs that you can see here on the right, but it's also composed by the GAR, the Government Assisted Resettlement Program, and the BVOR, so the Blended Visa Office Referred Program, which are like two programs in which the state play a key role in the resettlement of the refugees. But in any case, we're gonna focus on the private sector supported resettlement programs of Canada, the private sponsorship of refugees. For one reason, which is this summer school is focused on private sponsorship and community sponsorship, so like a mere utilitaristic reason, but also for another reason, that is in Canada right now, more than 50% of the resettlements are undertook by the private sector. So right now, historically wasn't always like this, but right now the private sponsorship of refugee program play a key role, a majority role in resettlement in Canada. So what's private sponsorship? You probably already know since you're taking this summer school. I'll give you like a super quick definition according to which private sponsorship is a resettlement mechanism where the main actor is not the public authority. We have seen here why I can go back. Yeah, like there are like public supported resettlement scheme, but private entities play a key role and they manage all the phases of the process, from identifying the potential beneficiaries still abroad to organizing their transfer and finally arranging their reception and integration in the new host country. Well, traditionally, private sponsorship has been recognized as the source of several beneficial effects, from saving human lives, preventing, especially in the Mediterranean area, the so-called journeys of hope, to better organizing reception and integration service, since like through private sponsorship, we could and generally through resettlement, we could organize the entrance, the flows of migration in entrance in a country. There's also an active involvement of citizenship in migrants' reception, which we would say like correctly implement the idea of integration as a work that came from both the migrants, both the newcomers, and both like the original population of a country. And undoubtedly, there is a saving in public resources, since the cost of resettlement is undertook by private parties. Like community sponsorship, I would say it's something similar, and it's not the thing that we're gonna focus today. In community sponsorship, the main difference, I would say, is that private actors do not care about, are not involved in the selection of the beneficiaries abroad, and even in their transfer generally to the host state, but they principally care about reception and integration services of refugees already arrived in their country, so in the host country. In any case, according to these like several beneficial effects, humanitarian corridors are generally seen in Italy, as well as like private sponsorship programs in other countries that they are trying to implement this sort of program as a solution, as sort of like a panacea for all illness that characterize migration management. You can see here like several, well, it's in Italian, but like they all say the same, several articles from the Pope to the government keep on saying that, like in Italy as well as in other countries, if we want to deal with a better, if we want to arrive to a better migration management, we must scale up humanitarian corridors. They are like a solution for Italy, for Europe, for every country. That's like the main speech that characterize the public opinion when we speak about humanitarian corridors or private refugees. But what is like this common sense which is lacking is a deeper reflection on how to do this scale up, how like to replicate the Canadian model, which aspect of the Canadian model could be effectively replicated in Italy as well as in other countries, and which are the elements that should be avoided or even like improved if we want to realize a private sponsorship in a different country than Canada. Well, to do like this reasoning, I will spend just a few words about the Italian humanitarian corridors, as I said, and then we'll go through the Canadian system to see which are the differences that characterize these two environments. So if we look, we can give like an overview of the humanitarian corridors in Italy, and we can undoubtedly say that they're like quite a recent experience. Well, like right now it's 10 years since they started, but in comparison to the Canadian one, which started in 1970s, like 1978, they're definitely much younger. So they started in 2015 as a result of a bottom-up initiative. They were based on a first memorandum of understanding, so an agreement signed by the community of Sant'Egidio, which is a third sector organization, a faith-based organization, the Federation of the Italian Protestant Church, another faith-based organization, and the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Interior, under the impulse, under like the initiative of the third sector organizations, both Community of Sant'Egidio and the Federation of the Italian Protestant Churches, which asked to the ministries of like the Italian government, we would say, to start this program in order to activate a private sponsorship even in the Italian context, and at least at the beginning we can say like as to allow the resettlement of 1,000 of Syrian refugees allocated in Lebanon in 2015, all with all the expenses and all that, like the main activities carried out by the private sponsor, so Community of Sant'Egidio and the Federation of the Italian Protestant Churches, with only lateral activity that had been carried out by the Italian government. Looking at the legal framework, this first memorandum was the only effective source of regulation for the first humanitarian corridor. Well, we can say that like this memorandum recall the Article 25 of the EU regulation number 810 of 2009, the regulation on European visa. But as we probably know, even according to the European Court of Justice and European Court of Human Rights, this Article 25 indeed does not offer an effective basis for resettlement in Italy as well all around Europe, according to the restrictive lecture, like reading that the judges give to humanitarian visas disciplined by this Article 25. So what we can say that since the beginning, humanitarian corridors are lacking of a formal statutory background, of a normative background. Indeed, maybe you know that like humanitarian corridors has been replicated from 2015 to nowadays. The last one involved Palestinian refugees. There was like a 2021 in Afghanistan. There was like the Moria corridor, humanitarian corridors, etc., etc., etc. But all of them were only based on their own memorandum of understanding. So there is no an effective legal basis. Something happened in 2023 with the so-called Cutro decree, which just introduced the paragraph 1 bis in the article 1 sexies of like another legislative decree, while well, like the number are not that important, but it's just like a formal recognition of the existence of humanitarian corridors in Italy. There is no effective discipline. There are no saying in this article 1 sexies paragraph 1 bis about how the humanitarian corridors effectively, concretely works in the Italian system. All the regulation, which are like not so well detailed, are can be found just in the memoranda of the understanding, which basically says, well, private parties, private sponsor, third sector organization will care about everything from the selection to like the arrival of refugees in Italy and even to the starting of integration pathways in the Italian community. Looking about the scale, the numbers of humanitarian corridors in Italy from, like, as I said, from 2015 and the first Syrian refugees memorandum, like humanitarian corridors and memoranda has been replicated a few times. But nowadays, 10 years after the first memorandum, we can say that only few third sector organizations are actively involved in humanitarian corridors. Still the community of Sant'Egidio, still the Federation of Protestant Church. There is also the CEI, so like that Conferenza Episcopale Italiana, the Italian Episcopal Conference, and the Archie, which is like a non-faith-based third sector organization, but above that, no more. And which is more important, like the number of refugee, of beneficiaries of humanitarian corridors are indeed limited to few thousand. We're speaking about like the official number are not clear, but we're speaking about like around 5,000, 6,000 of refugees resettled through humanitarian corridors in 10 years. Well, I would like to ask you if you know how many arrivals we had last year or even like this first half of the year on the Italian coast. Do you know the numbers? Who knows? No one, because they're already sleeping. That's amazing. Well, like, I'll give you the answer. Like in Italy, we had this year around like already 30,000 arrival on the Italian coast. And so if you make a comparison, 30,000 in 6 months, 5,000 in 10 years, you can clearly see that the number of humanitarian corridors in Italy are clearly still limited. And so like humanitarian corridors are an exceptional mechanism. What we can also say about like if we deepen our look to the humanitarian corridors, we can make a distinction to better understand it between an external phase and an internal phase of the humanitarian corridor. And we will replicate this scheme also in relation to the private sponsorship of refugee program of Canada, since every private sponsorship scheme could be seen under these two different perspectives. There is an external phase dealing with migrant selection, and there is an internal phase dealing with the provision of integration, welcome and integration service to the beneficiary of private sponsorship. Looking at the external phase, that's the main topic of the Italian memoranda, which start defining the geographic and subjective areas of operation of each humanitarian corridors. So what does it mean? It means that each humanitarian corridors work only for certain refugees, so refugees coming from certain country of origin, and which are stationary, which right now lives in a specific country of first reception. As we said, in 2015, we started with Syrian refugees living in Lebanon. So we're like Lebanon was the country of first reception. Apart from that, the memoranda give broad criteria in order to identify the third sector organization which could play a role as a sponsor. They just say that they must have prior experience in reception and integration of asylum seekers and an effective presence in the area where the mechanism, where the humanitarian corridors will be activated. Well, in reality, these are really broad criteria, because indeed, like the private organization, the few private organizations are already, as I say here, ex ante and case by case politically chosen by the ministries. So it's not an open call for private sponsor to apply in order to become like sponsor in humanitarian corridors, but humanitarian corridors are the result of an agreement between the government and, we will say, already selected, really influenced, like well-known third sector organization which decide to implement this sort of private sponsorship scheme for a limited number of beneficiaries in a defined area of the world. Looking at the beneficiary, the memoranda of understanding, like from 2015 to today, generally replicate the same requisite they must satisfy in order to become an effective beneficiary of the humanitarian corridors. There is all the need for international protection, as evidenced by a prima facie recognition of refugee status by UNHCR. So basically, they should be refugees under 1951 Geneva Convention, or there are, like, say, additional condition of vulnerability that could be considered according basically to the qualification, to the requisite needed in order to satisfy the request for subsidiary protection, and what was humanitarian protection at the Italian level. And then every memorandum replicate further preferential factors that may contribute to successful selection, which are generally ties between the individual and the Italian society, like family already living in Italy, or friends, which clearly state that will help this individual and maybe its family to come and integrate in the Italian system. They are like preferential factors, but already highlight how even humanitarian corridors take for sure into account vulnerability, but also the potentiality of integration play a key role in beneficiary selection. Going further, from the requisite to their concrete application, we can see that, like, the proceeding of selection is characterized by an initiative driven by UNHCR, the IOM, the International Organization of Migration, the Italian Red Cross, and other religious community locally operating in the area from which beneficiaries are selected. For example, Lebanon for Syrian refugees, which identify potential candidates. So they made like a first list of potential candidates and communicate this list to the third sector organization, which have signed the memoranda of understanding with the Italian government. So the sponsor organization. At this point, the sponsor organization start the investigation phase. So third sector organization verify the candidate's vulnerability through interviews, through checking of their statement and background checks on their judicial record. Only right now, like public official, play a limited role. So they check the list of beneficiary prepared by third sector organization, which is a second level of selection. There is a first level carried out by UNHCR. There is a second level carried out by private organizations, so sponsor organization. And right now, which should be like the quasi-definitive list, is checked by the ministerial authorities. They carry out just a legal background check in order, first of all, to see if the refugee could pose a threat to the Italian judicial system, or generally like to the Italian society, and also above verify the satisfaction of the requisite for the issuing of the humanitarian visa under Article 25. At this point, sponsor organization, like after they receive the official and final list of beneficiaries, are then responsible for coordinating pre-departure activities, for example, like language training, and organizing the transfer to Italy of the selected individual, who will have to apply for, when they arrive in Italy, international protection, which adds a layer of uncertainty, since even if normally all the beneficiary or the people who arrived in Italy recognize their right to international protection, there is still this administrative procedure, and still this need indeed of formal recognition of right of protection, which add further uncertainty and well, we say broaden the time in which refugees has to wait for a formal recognition of their status, and also consequently the full possibility to enjoy social service, health service, school service offered by public authorities, like by the public system in Italy. What we have here, I would say, what we can see here. I would like to pose you a question, but I don't know if you will reply, so I will keep on going and then we'll speak about later. We speak that we can see here that private sponsors are entrusted with the de facto filtering power to determine which individuals will benefit from the right of asylum in Italy. UNHCR first, but then the sponsor organization indeed organize and the list of beneficiary, do a sort of cherry picking of the beneficiary, because for sure there are more people in condition of vulnerability in the area where humanitarian corridors are applied than the one selected. So they're indeed choosing who could benefit of the humanitarian corridors, who could benefit from the right of asylum in Italy, and who could not. And this proceeding, if we're speaking about due process and due proceeding, is indeed characterized by a layer of opacity. It appears indeed exempt from the application of these two principles, due process and due proceeding. For example, the exclusion from the selection procedure may occur simply through non-consideration in the list of the beneficiary. There is no need for specific motivation, both for UNHCR and private organization, for non-including an individual in the list of the potential beneficiary of humanitarian corridors. There is no also formalized legal mechanism to guarantee transparency in the decision made by the private entities, which write down, as I say, the list of the beneficiary. There is no right to access to procedural documents, nor the outcome of this procedure, both the first, then the second list, then the final list of beneficiary, can be subjected to a challenge before the Italian court. So we can see that the fact that right now there is a sort of privatization of refugees protection through humanitarian corridors, or selection of who will benefit from the right of asylum in Italy, indeed cause a violation of due process and procedural fairness in humanitarian corridors. Privatization, there is a sort of delegation of the choice from a public level, which generally deal with selection of individual entering into a country, to a private reality in a broader context of lack of a normative framework, since, as we say, there are only memoranda of understanding which broadly regulate how humanitarian corridors works, but there is no further specification on how this proceeding, especially the selection, should go, and how the private entities should carry out the proceeding in a fair and proper way. I just saw someone pulling up the hand, so I don't know if someone has a question about it. I'll be happy to stop and hear someone else's voice. That would be amazing. Some human contact, but no, that was just a joke, an illusion. So I'll keep on going and finally move. Well,
Sorry, sir.
Yeah.
I think there's a comment or a question in the
Because wow.
Wow, yeah, I have a question.
But as I told you, Professor Luca, it's amazing. Just call me Luca. As I mentioned, so I have just a question here or more. Daniela Vitello, you're sorry. No, it's
Luca, there is also
sponsor in Canada are
Yeah.
not responsible for their role is only in the research. No. As we're gonna see in a few seconds, in Canada is a proper private sponsorship mechanism. It's not a community sponsorship. So like private sponsor, we're gonna see like in few seconds as the like they're in charge of the selection of beneficiaries starting from like the country in which they're like right now living, and also like they take charge of their transfer in Canada, and then from there they start the integration pathway. So it's a proper like private sponsorship mechanism, and it's not a community sponsorship. We're gonna see it like in few seconds. Thank you so much, Ala, and sorry if I wasn't clear, but I hope that I'm gonna be more and more clear right now that I'm gonna deal with the Canadian system. But like if you have questions, just like open the microphone or just like pull up the hand and speak. Interrupt me, because it's gonna be like better for our dialogue. And like,
Hello.
yeah.
So there's somebody else in the classroom, but would you prefer to take all the questions at the end of your session?
I'll stop like with the, I'll end with the Italian situation, well, like with the Italian context, and then we can have like 5 minutes of question, and then we move on to the Canadian one. Is it fine?
Okay, it's fine. That's fine.
Cool. Amazing. What's your name? Like the brave guy who's speaking.
Erekle Koplatadze.
Wow, that's gonna be really hard for me like to replicate, but I'll do the best, Eric. So like moving on like to the content of the memorandum of understanding, as I say, they deal with external phase for sure, like they mainly deal with the external phase, but only just say a few words about like the internal phase. So like the service of integrate the welcome and like integration service that must be provided by the private sponsors. They're like really important aspects which are like not dealt with in the memorandum of understanding, since not just like entrance in a country is a fundamental public interest, but also integration in a country play a key role as a fundamental public interest. What is lacking? There is like no service standards, no prior evaluation of the service offered by the sponsor for 1 year. So the sponsor must care about welcoming and integrating refugees for 1 year, nor there is like a clear definition of the level and like the contents of the service that must be provided by private sponsor to refugees. Indeed, there are several like operative manual written by the private sponsor themselves, in which they say like that it will try to replicate the Italian Sistema di Accoglienza e Integrazione, system of welcome and integration working for inland refugees, but they're not binded to it. For example, even the level of the pocket money, so like the money that must be provided to each refugee every day, is like hugely different from the one provided by the government, and in this manual, the one provided by the private organization. Because like basically, according to this manual of operative manual of private organization, for example, pocket money is half of the governative one. It is compensated by the activity of the volunteers, but indeed is a huge difference that should be taken into account and should be like, under my opinion, regulated, as well like the possibility of an effective oversight, of an effective monitoring mechanism during the implementation phase of the sponsorship to ensure like the quality of the integration service, which is lacking, an effective training program for the sponsor, as well a clear definition of public and private competency. So what has to be done, like in relation to the integration services by the state, and what must be done according to the memorandum of understanding, according like their willingness to take care of refugees by private sponsorship. In Italy, there is no clear definition, and it becomes particularly relevant in case of sponsorship breakdown. What happened if like a refugee and his sponsor are not going well together? If they decide to part their way up, there is no clear definition of responsibility. Should the state take charge of the refugee, or it should take charge of the refugee, but it could act towards the sponsor in order to ask for a refund of the cost of the services provided directly by the state to the refugee, which should have been provided by the sponsor. In Italy, these aspects are not clear. So right now, I have, happily for you, ended the Italian humanitarian corridors overview, and we're moving to the Canadian system. But as I promised, if you have question even from the classroom, we could like stop 5 minutes, have a chit chat, and then continue with the Canadian system. Now everybody's scared? Do we have hands? We're not. So, okay, cool. Adama. Yala, cool.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
So you said that there is no legal mechanism that guarantees transparency while promoting entities are choosing the candidate for like sending them to Italy in Lebanon.
Exactly.
Yes. So I think that you may also think that it puts in jeopardy this whole process. No, in a way. So you said that there should be some legal framework for that, like drawn up. What are there any practices in cases of the other countries that when these kind of situations are regulated or no, or is it just Italy?
We're gonna right now we're gonna indeed see how in Canada works. The fact is that is a delegation of function to private entities. And what happened, generally, it's not the only case in the Italian and judicial system, as well as in any judicial system in which public authorities delegate function to private entities, from security to public transport to whatever. But the fact is that what is lacking here effectively is a regulation which say how private sponsors should behave in the proceeding. There is no regulation of the proceeding, which is totally remitted to the private organization. And so when there is a delegation of function to private individuals, some sort of guarantees which should be ensured in the public proceeding, in the administrative proceeding, must be translated also in the proceeding involved, carried out by these private parties. That's what I think. Some sort of guarantees must also act for the selection carried out by private sponsor if they're just carried out by private sponsor. A clear regulatory framework which could provide a model, a comparison for the private activity, would make this control, an external control, feasible. Without even a legal framework, any sort of control is impossible, since there is no means of comparison, and so basically how to proceed is generally remitted to the choice of the voluntary parties. On the other hand, that's the tricky aspect. The more we regulate, the risk is that the less the private sponsorship, the private entities, could be attracted to become sponsors. So we must find a sort of balance between public regulation and public intervention and the freedom of private entities to become part of the sponsorship. Well, the thing is that right now, Italy is working with humanitarian corridors only as an exceptional solution. Only 5,000 individuals beneficiaries in 10 years. If we want to do a scale up, in my opinion, some sort of control, some sort of effective public involvement, both in the selection and then in the implementation of the private sponsorship, must be realized, must be implemented. Otherwise, it will become sort of Far West, and it will become sort of discretionary decision remitted only to private entities, which should not be totally allowed, considering also the vulnerability of the individual beneficiary, which are the beneficiary of the humanitarian corridors, and also above all the plural public interest which are involved in private sponsorship. but like we'll get back on this after like the Canadian system explanation. I don't know who spoke.
Okay.
Adama or La?
Very well.
Adama?
Good morning, Prof.
I can hear you.
Good morning, Prof. I hope you can hear me very
Yeah,
well.
I can hear you right now.
We're grateful for the beautiful lectures. I'm learning a lot. However, at some point I just have some concerns, and I believe I must register the same with regards to the issue of the private sector coming into issues of migration and trying to put their hands into or dipping their hands in order to ameliorate the situation with regards to the inflow of migrants. My only worry is with regards to concerns that raised with regards to conflicts of interest, looking at the private sector and their human resource needs and comparing same or looking on the other hand the interest of migrants in trying to integrate themselves durably. You realize that there may be a gross or a great tendency of having issues of conflicts of interest when it comes to the private sector handling or keeping their hands in issues of migration and admission processes and integration processes. What is your take on this?
Her I like his was Adama. Sorry, I didn't hear like perfectly all your intervention, but like what I heard, you were like highlighting the concern about the involvement of private parties in migration management. Was that it? And like I totally that's what I'm like basically saying, that humanitarian corridors, private sponsorship, or valuable solution for migrant management. But in my opinion, like also considering all the flows that the public system could have, like migration management cannot be just left to private parties. Cannot be there cannot be like a complete privatization of migration management and for example in this case refugee assistance. It will be like a far easy solution for public authorities to just like leave the field to private organization without controlling it, without overseeing it, without taking an effective care of migration. That's because like migration is generally like, especially like in Europe, it's a political inconvenient affair. So like not dealing with migration and leaving it to like private, not dealing at least with especially entrance and like integration services could be like a political choice in order to show that like we are not taking care of migration, we're not doing anything of migration, like they're just like private parties doing something. But on the other hand, as you say, like privatizing migration could have like bad consequences, considering of like the individual and private interest that could be involved in the sort of selection carried out by private party, which could go like from only like economical matters, which could take like place of the vulnerability aspect to like the transmigration, I would say the transformation, as indeed in Canada is happening, from a like a vulnerability and like a refugee protection system to a broader family reunification system, which is not naturally and automatically like a bad thing, but which is a thing we must reflect on it. Like transforming a private sponsorship to you might like family reunification system could have some positive consequences, especially in terms of procrastination and survivability of the system. But on the other hand, like we are totally like forgetting, which is the original foundation, which is the original goal of the sponsorship of refugee, which is like in broad term like the goal of resettlement. So that's the way in which I would say that private are like for all public administration activities, even for like migrants management, are for sure resource. But like privatization, like full privatization cannot be, at least in my opinion, the solution. A sort of involvement of public parties and effective involvement of private parties competent and with adequate resources must be ensured to like guarantee indeed, as we're gonna see, the fairness of the proceeding and some sort of also application, as we will see, of the due process in relation of these of how like private sponsorship of refugees works.
Thank you, Prof.
Oh, you're welcome. Sorry, Adama, if I didn't like get everything, but like at the end of the presentation, you will have my email, and my name is like 9 letters at all. Like that is my parents decided it in order, like if they want to shout my name and say, Luca, you're behaving bad, like they could do easily. So like the email is quite simple, luca.galli@unimi.it. It will be like shown at the end. So like I'm open also to further question. We'll keep on going with Canada finally. And then like if you, oh no, I don't know if Allah has still like the hand raised. And Allah, hope like the pronunciation is good.
Yeah. Can you hear
Yeah.
me clearly?
Clear and sound.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm not sure if it's somehow far away from the lecture. I'm going to ask anyway. So I'm curious about the
No,
verification
Allah,
process
like
of
I
the
cannot, not like it's,
Yeah.
I said clear and sound, but I was probably joking.
Yeah, Ella, we can't hear you. Maybe you can type your question in chat if you don't mind.
I'm typing, cool. It's quite lagging. Hope I'm not lagging. You can hear me clearly. Cool. Otherwise, like, Allah, you can write it like on chat, and then I will like go back on it at the end of the presentation, maybe if you want. Otherwise, if you want just like to stay focused on my boring presentation, you can type it like by mail, and then if it's something of like interest for everybody, I can share with and for sure it will be, I can share it with Daniela, which will have like it back to everybody. But like as like the thing was about Canada and I have like half an hour to deal with, even less probably, I will move quickly on the Canada system. I'll type it on chat. I'll answer like at the end. And like what we have in Canada, private sponsorship of refugee program, as we say, as a part of like a broad context of resettlement made also by the BV or OR, which is like the blended visa office referred refugee system, and the GAR, which is like the government assisted refugee resettlement system. Looking at like a general overview of the Canadian private sponsorship refugee program, like the Italian humanitarian corridors, PSR, like a private sponsorship of refugee program, was originated from private initiatives, but not at the beginning of the 21st century, but at the beginning of the 20th century. So it was like in the 1910s when the Mennonite Central Faith Organization and other faith-based organizations started a dialogue with the Canadian government without any legal framework in order to implement some sort of, well, like not properly refugee, because we hadn't like a definition of refugee, but like vulnerable individual resettlement mechanism, which become far like more and more frequent, especially after the Second World War, during which like high number of displaced individuals in European countries after the war were resettled from Europe to Canada, thanks to this third sector organization, thanks to the initiative of this third sector faith-based organization, which started sorts of agreement with Canadian government in order to define the number of individuals that could be resettled in Canada through like private sponsorship. Everything changed like drastically in the 70s. Like Canada signed the Geneva Convention of 1951 in 1979, and so like in 1976 started regulating its own immigration law. And in the Immigration Act of 1976, followed by the Immigration Regulation, which provide with specific like normative in order to implement the Immigration Act, Immigration Regulation of 1978. So like the immigration law of Canada was defined, and even private sponsorship of refugee received a clear normative scheme. So differently from what is happening right now in Italy, in Canada, after 50 years, we have to say, of experiment, we arrived to a clear normative definition of private sponsorship of refugee program and how this program should work. Right now, like the legislation is made by the Immigration, Refugee and Protection Act of 2001 and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulation of 2002, which has been updated during the year, especially in 2012. What do we have to say here? So like this solid framework, this clear operative base provided the private sponsorship of refugee program in Canada. So with a strong basis in order to be applied and in order to work in the Canadian system. Indeed, in these 50 years, we have to say, over 4,200 refugees has been resettled to the private sponsorship of refugee program. So we're speaking about 9,000 beneficiaries annually, which is the double of the total amount of beneficiary we had in Italy in the last 10 years. Moreover, if in Italy we have, like generally speaking, around 5 private organizations implementing humanitarian corridors, in Canada we have more than 130 organizations stable. They're like constantly engaged in private sponsorship of refugee, and millions of Canadians through this organization, or as we're gonna see individually, have participated in refugee resettlement effort, which could say is an ordinary mechanism for resettlement in Canada. For a long period, as I said, the GAR, the government-based resettlement, has higher number than private sponsorship of refugee. But right now, like the private sponsorship of refugee has generally surpassed the government-based system, according like to the number in effective resettlement of a refugee in the Canadian system. So it's like a central stone of the Canadian resettlement and immigration generally system. Even in Canada, in the private sponsorship of Canadian private sponsorship of refugee scheme, we can distinguish between an external phase and an internal phase. Looking at the external phase, so the selection of beneficiary, since it is an ordinary tool, there are no geographic and subjective area of operation defined by the regulation. So what does it mean? That a sponsor can choose to sponsor any refugees, any refugee from coming from every country, and currently located in all countries. So it's like different from the Italian situation in which humanitarian corridors are activated for a specific crisis. Syrian in Lebanon, refugees in Moria, Afghan people, etc., etc., etc. In Canada, sponsor can sponsor every refugee coming from every country and located in every country of first reception. Naturally, even in Canada, like mediatic, like crises, which are like well published by media, generally tend to receive more support. Peak of the private sponsorship program happened in 2015 during the Syrian crisis, happening during like the Ukrainian war, happening during the Afghan crisis. So even if like media play a key role in order to boost up the number of private sponsorship, there are no geographic and subjective area limitation regarding geographic and subjective area of the operation. Moving to the sponsor requirement, like in Canada, there are like clear definition of who can be a sponsor and which characteristics, which features a sponsor must have in order to become a sponsor. So there are no broad criteria and predetermined agreement between government and like few number of sponsors, but there are like clear regulation about the characteristic of the sponsor that the sponsor must satisfy in order to fall within one of these three categories of sponsor. We have the sponsorship agreement holders, the community group, and the group of five. The sponsorship agreement holder, the SAAH, are sort of some sort of like professional sponsor, I would say, are the one mostly similar to the Italian sponsor in the humanitarian corridors, are generally huge or like significant private and generally faith-based organization. 90 out of like 130 organizations are faith-based organization that enter into formal agreements with the Ministry of Immigration to conduct specific number of sponsorship annually. So there is like this agreement that characterize the sponsorship agreement holders between the organization and the government, through which they state the number of beneficiaries that each organization would resettle during the year, and they also define like the basic characteristic, like the economical structure, the kind of services, etc., 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 that must characterize each stable organization, each stable sponsorship agreement organization involved in migrant resettlement, also private sponsorship. Above this sort of professional sponsor, we have community groups and groups of five. Community groups are private organizations, both profit or non-profit, for example, entrepreneurs or firms, etc., that undertook sponsorship without formal agreement. So they decide as an organization that could be profit or non-profit to start the program and take care of the resettlement of certain beneficiary. And then we have like group of five, which are informal, so not like formal organization, but informal group of at least 5 Canadian citizens, but also permanent resident. That's really important for the procrastination of the system, that decide collectively to commit to sponsoring a refugee. So we have from like real formal reality that are sort of like professionally involved in migrant sponsorship, to even like spontaneous group of at least 5 Canadian citizens and permanent residents, which could take care of refugee resettlement. What we have to say furthermore, like we're gonna see in few seconds that there is an effective control on the qualification of private sponsorship. But before of that, like Canadian regulation also clearly defines which are the beneficiary requisites. So like the requisites that the migrants should satisfy in order to become a beneficiary of the private refugee sponsor scheme. And they're like quite similar to the Italian one, since there are 2 classes of potential beneficiaries, which are convention refugees aboard class, so subjects that are considered like refugees under 1951 Geneva Convention, and also country of asylum class beneficiary, which encompasses individual fleeing civil wars, armed conflict, or severe violation of their fundamental rights. So broad definition of vulnerability, which is not so different from like the second category of possible beneficiary in the Italian humanitarian corridors. If we look at the administrative proceeding for beneficiary selection, this is quite different from the Italian one. And it's quite different, like the main difference is the involvement of the effective and active involvement of Canadian officials abroad, like the Canadian visa offices abroad, in order to verify if the beneficiary satisfy, the potential beneficiary satisfy the requirements to enjoy the right of asylum in Canada. So the verification, the determination of eligibility is conducted by the Canadian visa offices abroad or ex ante, so autonomously, so independently of any specific sponsorship request, to create a list of eligible refugees according, in most cases, to UNHCR suggestion. So like in area of refugee crisis, UNHCR provided Canadian visa offices with potential list of beneficiaries, and then the Canadian visa officer double-check this list and verifies which individual indeed satisfy the requisite indicated by the Canadian regulation. But this determination could be also conducted ex post, so following a sponsorship request regarding an individual not included in the pre-established list by the Canadian visa office abroad. So what happened here is the so-called naming of refugees by the private sponsor. Private sponsor name a refugee, but this refugee which is named, which is like informally selected by the private sponsor, must go through a determination of eligibility by the Canadian Visas Office. In this case, so public authorities should ensure that private sponsor assessment of eligibility are correct. At this point, there is also, as I said, not just a beneficiary evaluation, but also a sponsor evaluation, which is carried out by the centralized processing office in Canada, which evaluates the effective capability of the sponsor to adequately resettle the migrants, so transported from the country of first reception to Canada and then start effective pathways of integration in the Canadian society. This evaluation is quite strict for the community group and the group of fives, is less strict for the sponsorship agreement holders, since they have been already formally recognized as able, as capable of conducting a sponsorship through the formal agreement between this organization and the government. In any case, all these organizations, all the sponsors must meet several criteria, from like adequate financial resources involved in sponsorship, which must not be inferior to the one provided by the government system, to the organization of the infrastructure, so like housing, so like schooling and even training for work, and like there is also a background check on previous experience, especially in welcoming and supporting migrants or like people in a situation of vulnerability, of this sponsor conducted by governative officials located in Ottawa in the centralized processing office. Furthermore, each sponsor must produce a detailed settlement plan, so a specific settlement plan adequate to the characteristic of the beneficiary, which is a single, a family, a couple, etc., where it must be detailed which sort of services should be provided, will be provided to these individuals by the sponsor in order to ensure an effective evaluation of the adequate nature of the integration pathway that will be implemented when the migrants arrive in Canada. So as we see here with the double check, if the beneficiary is eligible and the sponsor is adequate, then the sponsorship can begin. And the refugees arrived in Canada as permanent resident, already as permanent residents. So they must not have to do any application for international protection, which give them a more immediate and more stable, would say like legal condition than the one that the beneficiary of humanitarian corridors receive in Italy as seekers of asylum. Apart from that, like even the internal phase of the private sponsorship of refugee program is well detailed in Administrative Act and in the Canadian regulation. As we say, there must be a reception plan evaluation, there is a public training program, there is even like an organization that include all the representative of the sponsorship agreement, all holders, in order to like create a specific way to dialogue, to implement a dialogue between the government and the sponsor. There is an effective oversight by territorial office on the conduct of the sponsor and even like of the beneficiaries during the sponsorship. And there is a clear definition of responsibility, private and public, even in relation to the case of breakdown of sponsorship, which clearly define who has to take care of the refugee if there is a rupture in the sponsorship, according to which is the fault to whom has the fault of the sponsorship breakdown. Apart from that, as we said, that we can just say, like, if we focus on due proceeding and due process in Canada, what we can say, like, for sure that like the public oversight, also like the double checking conducted by the Canadian visa offices abroad and the central processing office may play a key role in assuring the fairness of the selective procedure, both on the side of the beneficiary and on the sponsor. So like the involvement of public officials must play a key role, could play a key role in the correct evaluation of the sponsor as adequate to provide a sponsorship and of the beneficiary as an effective individual in a vulnerability condition. However, like in reality, if it's still important, this involvement of public officials, this like public proceeding which intervene in private sponsorship, like several voices arose in order to highlight how this public involvement resulted in administrative burdens, especially for sponsor, and not always satisfy due proceeding principles. So the PSRP, the Private Sponsorship of Refugee Program procedure, may also work as a barrier, and any reference to Games of Thrones has to be taken as real for the effective implementation of the sponsorship. What we can say, for example, what like the sponsor are complaining of an effective administrative burden. So like what are complaining about the sponsor is mainly about like the bureaucratic fatigue that they're experiencing. What they highlight is that like in the 70s, the procedure involved a couple of pages and like a few hours of works in order to become a sponsor. Right now, like they say, there are like dozens of pages that must be filled in, which a work in order to become sponsored that like could ask for weeks or not month of time to be spent in this administrative proceeding in order to qualify as a sponsor. And particularly, they claim that like the requisite, they must submit like a complete breakdown of their financial sponsorship capacity, including tax income forms, income split, pension statement, and complex settlement plan, which involve like the need for complex document expertise that they sometimes do not have, or at least like they force them to spend a lot of time in this proceeding that could also result in discouraging them from becoming a sponsor. So on the one hand, like complex administrative proceeding, which could ensure due proceeding in the selection of beneficiary and sponsor, could also result in bureaucratic burdens for the sponsor. On the other hand, even beneficiary, so like the migrants involved in the selection procedure, highlighted that not always the due proceeding principle is well applied during the proceeding characterizing PSRP. For example, the Canadian visa officials abroad are well trained in immigration law because they have to deal with several aspects of immigration law. But they are not generally particularly specifically trained in refugee law, which is a specific area of immigration law, as we all know. And so there is like a huge difference in relation to the competence of these officials abroad with the official working in Canada for the inland request of refugee, of like asylum protection. There is a specific board in Canada dealing with inland request of asylum protection, with specific competence in refugee law. So first of all, there is this sort of like distinction of lack of competence, of qualification of the official abroad, which also could negatively affect on the result of the proceeding. Apart from that, other aspects that negatively affect the application of the due proceeding principle are related to the short time of the interview, like 40 minutes, they say 1 hour, during which the migrants must explain, must show all the elements of their vulnerability, which allow them to satisfy the requirements to become a beneficiary, often without a clear information about which are the requirements in order to become beneficiary of the private sponsorship, and often without any sort of legal assistance. Indeed, even if legal aid is admitted, there is no public funding, so there is no like public supported legal aid for candidates to beneficiary selection. And so if they want to be legal assisted, they have to provide their own legal. And so this is really expensive, especially for like refugees. And so generally it results in the lack of legal assistance during this proceeding. Furthermore, many applicants still receive rejection letter, so denial to the qualification of beneficiary without sufficient motivation. So there was this like data research in 2013, it's quite old, like there are no newer data, but like in 2014, like 15% of the cases of like the rejection of beneficiary cases, the letter has only 1 to 5 line to motivation, and in 14% of cases, there were no motivation at all. Above all, we must say that like a real flow of the administrative proceeding of beneficiary selection is connected to the timing of the proceeding. We're speaking about 2 to 3 years of duration of this proceeding, which is clearly not compatible with the nature of the mechanism. We can just think about like of the dramatic situation in which refugees are, why they're probably threatened by the risk of being returning in their own country, where their life is under threat. But also apart from that, they're living in refugee camps where like children education, training for works, healthcare are not always fully ensured, as well as during like these 2 and 3 years, like even the situation both of the sponsor and the family of the beneficiary could change. New child could born, or and so this would also comport a different need for different resources by the sponsor, or even like the sponsor could change his mind on becoming an effective sponsor and like being involved in the private sponsorship of refugee schemes. So like the involvement of public official, even if it's a guarantee of due proceeding, not always translate in due proceeding, and above all, it translates also in administrative burdens and in administrative timing, which are not always well suited in a correct implementation of the sponsorship program. But even if we are looking at the due process, so like the capability, the possibility of a judicial review on the statement, on the denial, I would say, of the inclusion as a beneficiary in private sponsorship of Canadian private sponsorship of refugee, we can say that like on paper, both sponsor and refugees has instrument to contest the decision of the Canadian officials. So first of all, they can make a request for reconsideration directly to visa offices and visa official, which is a discretionary and an inner and like a discretionary tool. So are just like the visa office which decide if and how reevaluate the request for inclusion as a beneficiary in the private sponsorship of refugee program. But the real formal solution is ask for judicial review before the federal court in Canada. So there is a judicial review, but even this judicial review has some concrete obstacle in order to be fully implemented. First of all, they must obtain the so-called leave, so a permission, so evaluation of like a broad evaluation of admissibility of the judicial review, which is provided by the same federal court judge before proceeding to hearing on the merits, with a decision on the leave which are not appealable. So first obstacle is the necessity of a permission of a first evaluation of admissibility by the own judge on the judicial review itself. And then, even when the leave is granted, applications are not reassessed. I say here on a de novo basis by the federal court, which it means court just verify the reasonableness of the decision of the visa office of the Canadian Public Administration. So they do not evaluate the case ex novo by their own self, but they just like verify the decision of the Canadian office in order to understand, in order to check if it is reasonable or not. And then even a positive judicial review does not result in the like decision of the public administration to be overturned. So does not result in the granting of the admission of the individual in the private sponsorship of refugee program, because it results so only in the annulment of the administrative decision, and so like on the case being sent back for redetermination to a different visa officer. So even succeeding in judicial review does not equally means to be admitted in the private sponsorship of refugee program. Just to give you some quick data before ending this presentation, we can see here like the data are old, but as I said, they're not like more recent data. From 2011 to 2015, only the 8.47% of the total request for private sponsorship rejected sought judicial review. 403 over 5,500. More of 1/3 of these 403 were denied of leave, and only like 154 cases as positive outcomes. So only 154 cases over like 5,500 indeed received an effective judicial protection. What does it mean? That like judicial review also in Canada, even if formally exists, is not an effective legal resource for failed resettlement applicants. Which are the obstacles? The first of all is a material one, a practical one. Conducting a litigation in a Canadian court is unachievable for the vast majority of displaced persons abroad. Generally, the individual which are allowed, which manage to start a judicial review, are someone who has a private, like a really connected, well-connected private sponsor in Canada, which start the complaint on the name of this individual. And furthermore, the federal court has adopted a very differential approach in overseas refugees matters. So generally, it's quite hard that federal court deny the correctness of the decision of the administrative officials involved in private sponsorship of refugee. So on one hand, we have an involvement of public administration in private sponsorship of refugee proceeding, which ensure like a sort of due proceeding, a fair proceeding, but apart from like some defect, cause like time-consuming proceeding and administrative burden. On the other hand, formally, we have some sort of like judicial control, but in reality, the concrete consequences of this judicial control, of this judicial review are indeed limited. Well, here I say that there are like several other challenges that characterize the Canadian model. And like moving quickly to the conclusion, what I would just say is that when we are thinking about like exporting the Canadian model in a different background, like in a different judicial system, in different nation, in a different society, for sure we should take care of the different geographical, social, cultural, economic, and judicial context of the two nations. But also we must keep on looking at the Canadian model, not only as a model to be like purely inspired with, but also as a model characterized by flaws that should be overcome, rearranged, improved when and if we are gonna do a scale up in like a replication and the following scale up in a different nation. For example, for what I say here, under my point of view, a fair proceeding principle should play a key role, especially because judicial review is complex. It's like unfeasible under a practical matter that should be granted maybe, but it's clearly difficult to be implemented and taking into account the fact that the refugees are in a different country. So there is a need for a public oversight, in my opinion, in humanitarian corridors in Italy, especially if you're aiming to increase the number, but oversight might involve not over complex proceeding and above all, but that's a problem that characterizes all Italian administration, all Italian administrative proceeding in migration law and in other field of administrative activity. They should be well-founded. So we must devolve fund to this administration to be involved in the oversight of the humanitarian corridors, in the training of the official and especially in the number of the official, because we cannot allow to replicate the time-consuming solution that right now is crippling the Canadian system. 2 or 3 years of waiting for the decision on beneficiaries or like on the feasibility of the sponsorship is totally irrational. Then we must also reflect on broader questions like if vulnerability should be a profile to be taken into account by the public official in the oversight of humanitarian corridors as a feature that must be asked to the beneficiary, or we could strengthen the naming profile also of the humanitarian corridor and transform it in a broader family reunification solution. In any case, all the things are, in my opinion, related to a well-balanced system that involves both private and public operators. Because on the one hand, excessive public intervention undermines the nature of private sponsorship. But on the other hand, like private sponsorship, as we already said before, thank you to your intervention, cannot become an escape route for public administration, for policy, for the government to reject their role as guarantors of public interest and rights of all the members of the community, like the old one and the new one, the newcomers. With this, I have concluded. I thank you so much for not falling asleep, and you can find here my email. I don't know if we have time for further discussion, maybe 5 minutes.
Hi, Luca. Yes, I guess maximum 5 minutes sharp because Daniele is already
Here.
connected.
But as I
Thank you
say,
very much. Thank you very much for this overarching analysis of the Canadian humanitarian mission model and private sponsorship model compared to the Italian humanitarian mission system. Let's see if there is time for just one or two questions.
I have the one like that Adama wrote down in
There's
so
that one.
Canada is a standard model. Is a standard model for integration of migrants, especially with the involvement of private actors or sponsorship. Considering the various disadvantages that come, how soon and tenable do you think that EU jurisdiction can easily meet up with the standard model? Further, don't you think that EU jurisdiction may never come close toward implementing the standard model, taking into consideration different? I totally agree with, like, I already just give like the thumbs up to Adama. Like, concretely, in my opinion, like geography is fundamental, like we cannot joke about, and like if you every consideration of the Canadian model must start from like thinking that Canada is surrounded by like 3 ocean and the United States dot. Europe is in the middle of the migratory pathways, so it could be implemented. In my opinion, there could be a scale up. We have seen it like during the Ukrainian crisis, like in few months. Basically, like I'm speaking about like Italian numbers, but like I think that in Europe is quite the same. The numbers of community members, so private individuals, which wanted to become part of a sort of community sponsorship for Ukraine, that was a proper community sponsorship for Ukrainian refugees, reached the number of the migrants that could be like welcomed in the public system of welcoming and integration that existed for 30 years. So like room for improvement, for like increasing of the number, there is in Italy, and like a proper regulation, in my opinion, is needed, even if we like stay with this number or we implemented like we aim for further number. But like in reality, private sponsorship in Italy cannot become like the main engine, the main boost behind like migration management. Like the public role and like the inland refugees protection system, so like the protection system towards refugees that are arrived on the Italian coast still will play like a key role until at least on European level we will not recognize on a world level more than an European level an effective system of humanitarian visa, like possibility to ask for like visa for like asking refugees protection in a country from like another country. But right now, in my opinion, there are room for like improvements, but it cannot become like as numerous as like central as it is in Canada. Further question?
Thanks a lot, Luca.
No.
I actually think we ran out of time, but yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation, enriching presentation. And we're going now to a complementary one, because the next speaker is going to deal with labor pathways. So shifting from humanitarian and private sponsorship schemes for refugees to labor pathways. I kindly ask you to close your presentation.
Yeah, I'm like,
Yeah.
say bye to everybody, and like you have my mail, so if you want, text me. And thank you so much. Enjoy this fantastic summer school, and enjoy the summer in Italy if you are arrived in Italy to this summer school, to like to participate to this summer school. Goodbye to everybody.
Thank you, Luca. See you soon. Okay, I'm very glad to welcome the next speaker. Actually, can't see you, Daniele, on my screen. Let me see if there is something wrong. Maybe, yeah, if you talk, maybe I will see you.
Hello, Daniela. Hi.
Yeah, okay, great. Welcome. I'm going to introduce our next speaker now, Daniele Albanese. Daniele leads the European Union program at Talent Beyond Boundaries, advancing labor mobility for refugees and displaced talent across Europe. His work focuses on sustainable employment and socio-economic inclusion, and he serves on the boards of ICMC Europe Share Network, and is also part of our COSME team because he's part of the project advisory board alongside with Professor Espegalt and Petra Huek, who is going to speak on the summer training school on the 4th of July. We are particularly glad for your participation, Daniele, to this summer training school. And Daniele is going to give a talk on labor pathways for refugees, a legal and operational appraisal. Thank you very much, Daniele. You have the floor for the next hours, and please leave a little bit of time for the discussion, as our participants are really keen to intervene and to participate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniela. Can you hear me well?
Perfectly.
Wonderful and nice to meet you all. I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for the COSME project to ask me to participate and briefly introduce the work that I'm doing and we are doing on refugee labor mobility as a complementary pathway for protection. As mentioned, I've been working in this space of safe and legal migration channels for some years now. And today I would like really to concentrate on the work that we are doing in the last couple of years, in particular in Europe, but with the global outreach at Tallinn Beyond Boundaries as one and the only global organization working on refugee labor mobility and the different programs worldwide. So I will structure my presentation in those points, like understanding what is labor mobility, what is refugee labor mobility, and why is important. A little bit of history, where we are at the moment, principles and recommended attributes that have been developed by the Global Task Force on Refugee Labor Mobility that we are part of, TBB, so Tallinn Beyond Boundaries, and the program that we are running, and what do we do, and the process, how the process work, and global programs, so where we are at the global level, Canada, UK, Australia, and Europe a little bit, and a little deep dive on Italy, as you are following the master in an Italian university, of course, and some numbers about the impact that we are having at the global level. So first of all, labor mobility for myself, it is something that can change, of course, life of candidates, of refugees, and also transforming the narrative. We don't have to forget that in all our programs and in all complementary pathways, refugees are at the center of what we are doing. Their dignity, protection, and the possibility to rebuild their life with dignity and purpose is a guiding principle of what we are doing. Those are just 4 stories in UK, Canada, Australia, and Ireland, of 4 different displaced talent that we supported with different companies to move through labor pathways and the work visa, and really be able to rebuild their life for themselves and their families in those countries. I think it's a matter also about transforming the narrative, because for the first time, we are not talking about refugees as the poor, vulnerable, in need of something or aid or international aid, but really people that can transform their life, that can leverage their skills, that have competencies, that have background, that just are amazing candidates for employers worldwide. They are software engineers, they are nurses, they are data analysts, technicians, and doctors, and so on, that can really leverage their competencies to transform the narrative and really contribute to the societies that they are hosted. So a little bit of background. Why is important, and what is basically refugee labor mobility. So labor mobility is one of the third country solution that we are that the global system, let's say, international system led by UNHCR and IOM, as 2 humanitarian agencies working on migration and refugees, are building. One is resettlement and humanitarian mission, and I guess you've already touched based on before, family reunification as a right-based solution. So there is a right that can support family to be reunified. Is one of the main channel of entry at the world level. And what we are talking today is a complementary pathways that are skills based. So the selection is based on the skills of candidates that can come through those pathways. So why there is such a high interest at the global level on refugee labor mobility in particular? First of all, the highest numbers of refugees ever, probably you already mentioned it, in the last global trends released last week by UNHCR, 122 million refugees worldwide. That is the highest number of refugees ever due to the several conflicts that are ongoing and are not solving, as we are all seeing. So there is a need of solution in general, generally speaking. Protracted crisis, so it's not only new crises and new wars that are forcing people to flee, but also the long-lasting crises that are protracted. So people that are living since generations sometimes, as we are seeing, like Palestinians or others like Syrians after 10 years, Congo after many years, and so on, that are protracted and where people seek solution for themselves and their families. Resettlement is going down. So humanitarian admission and resettlement, as you probably already mentioned, the US administration just cut off the main global program on humanitarian admission and resettlement in the US, as well as Germany, which was the second one globally, as well as other countries in Europe that are following the example of the Trump administration in the US. So really narrowing down the possibility of humanitarian admission based on needs of and vulnerabilities of refugees. So there is a general lack of durable solution, as people cannot go back to their countries because the crises are not yet solved, and people cannot move forward because there is no resettlement program that are wide enough to support their needs. Plus, in the 55% of the countries that host refugees, including also Western countries. So if we don't include Western countries where the majority of refugees are, the number is even higher. Refugees are not allowed legally or formally to work, so they cannot really sustain themselves. And in a camp-based solution or resettlement solution is not a real solution for their life. So that's why from one side, there is from the supply side, let's say, there is a huge need of solution and complementary pathways for refugees. From the other side, on the demand side, there is a huge demand from employers and generally speaking, a lack of talent in all the Western countries. From one hand, because of demography in general, like in our countries, which is one of the most aging population in Europe, in Italy, we already lack thousands of people in order to sustain the welfare system and employers. And from the other hand, the lack of talent and competencies, so what is called the mismatch between competencies and talents, is one of the reasons that it brings Europe to attract talents into countries as well as other Western countries. And then there are like diversity and inclusion advantages that even if publicly after the new US administration, it has been a little bit a decrease into that. There are several policies and companies that recognize the value of diversity and inclusion in their decision-making process. There is a higher productivity when decisions are made by intercultural environment. 87% of inclusive teams take better decisions according to the last PwC report, as well as client acquisition and fidelization as more clients are asking for products and for companies that have an attention to D&I in general, as well as increasing employees' participation. So colleagues and employees that can work alongside with refugees can have a better participation and higher productivity. So from the supply side, there is a huge demand, there is a huge supply. From the demand side, there is a huge demand, but still there is a lacking of the system that can work. In the last UNHCR OECD report, only 4% of the visas that has been released to the main nationalities of refugees in the major Western countries, plus Brazil and OECD countries plus Brazil, only 4% of that are labor visa. So that means that even if there is a supply-demand market, potential market, there is not yet a complementary pathways that can really work on this. So let's go back also to a little bit of background and history. It's not the first time that we are talking about refugee labor mobility at the global level. Actually, it was the first solution that the international community brought into the space of refugees displacement and providing solution. After the First World War, with the introduction of what the so-called Nansen passport. Nansen was one of it was the first High Commissioner for Refugees in the Society of Nations, so before the United Nations. And it lasted as an High Commissioner for 10 years, from 1920 to 1930. And it became very famous because it's introduced the Nansen passport. That was a passport released to displaced people that was agreed and recognized by 52 governments at that moment, which was used by 450,000 refugees globally that could move thanks to that passport. Refugees like Onassis, Chagall, Stravinsky, just major names in the global stage and VIP, of course, but also a lot of refugees that, thanks to that passport, could move for work and were accepted by 52 governments worldwide. So between the First and the Second World War, there was this huge labor mobility program thanks to that passport. Even after the Second World War, where there was a big and mass displacement, in particular within Europe, and with the creation of the United Nations as we know them today, and the multilateral system that we know today, there was a huge programs from Europe to US and Canada, and also within Europe to support displaced people and to move for work. So there was not before the 60s the idea of supporting humanitarian with the humanitarian aid refugees, but really including them into the labor system and the market and the job market as a solution for their crisis. After the 60s and with the growth and economic growth, in particular in Europe, things has started to change. So as Europe, we were kind of starting to close our borders to foreigners, and to begin what we call the humanitarian response, to resettlement, humanitarian mission, and other kind of responses. Only in the last year, so after 2015, the discussion about labor mobility became again something that was very important. It is very important at the global level. In 2015, Talent Beyond Boundaries was born as the first organization that was working on it, and three big major global conferences happened in 2016. The New York Declaration on Refugees and Migrants, highlighting the labor mobility as one of the key solutions. 2018, the Global Compact of Refugees, which is the, I would say, the milestone and the pillar of that is behind all the programs on the ongoing programs on refugee labor mobility, and then a strategy on resettlement and complementary pathways released by UNHCR in 2018 again. In 2022, the Global Task Force on Refugee Labor Mobility was born, and we as Italian Beyond Boundaries are part of it. And in the last Global Refugee Forum in 2023, so after 5 years from the Global Compact, refugee labor mobility and the task force has a major role. Just to highlight the last piece of history, even the global conference and meeting on tripartite between NGOs, so civil society organization, UN, and governments changed the name that used to be ATCR, so working on resettlement and humanitarian admission conference globally for many years since last year, and it has been celebrated last week in Geneva. It has changed the name to CRCP, so Consultation on Resettlement and Complementary Pathways. So meaning that complementary pathways are really increasing their potentiality and the role at the global level. So this is a bit of history on where we are. So what is the main difference between complementary pathways and humanitarian resettlement, humanitarian admission? Of course, resettlement is a process aimed at providing durable solution for refugees in a third country who cannot integrate locally and have to be assured about their protection and cannot be assured about their protection in the country where they live. It's a UNHCR-led process according to vulnerability criteria that are set in a procedure and approved by government that are receiving. Instead, complementary pathways is something that is additional to that and can add like legal channel of entry for education, for family unification, and what we are talking today for work visa. So like anyone else that can move, the simple way to understand it is what if an Australian want to come to Italy? The same kind of condition can apply to a refugee that is abroad, to a displaced person that is abroad. So how to make the process work is the work that we are doing. At the global level, as I mentioned, in 2022, Italian Beyond Boundaries and UN, other NGOs, private sector, and UN agencies form and create what is called the Global Task Force on Refugee Labor Mobility. That has the aim to providing guiding principles and recommendation to governments and all stakeholders that want to build up different labor mobility program worldwide, but also to bring forward the discussion at the global level in order to really scale and make this solution available to more and more candidates in the future for the reason that I mentioned. So what are the guiding principles of refugee labor mobility? Of course, there are safeguarding protection. So to safeguard the protection of candidates that are refugees or displaced people in the first countries of asylum and can move through work visa. So they become legally international workers as all the other candidates. It has to be a durable solution, so bringing to something that is durable in the country where they will be hosting, responsibility sharing as a principle, as well as additionality. So it has to be in addition to vulnerability-based program and resettlement and humanitarian admission program, non-discrimination, of course, and ethical recruitment and non-exploitation, which is kind of obvious. Family unit is a point, is a principle. So we need to guarantee that all labor mobility programs can support and include the family together with the principal applicant that, of course, is the person that get the job where they move. refugee autonomy and empowerment, and of course, confidentiality of data. But I would like also to focus on recommended attributes because I think that is something that is less recognized from one side, but also worth to explore from the others in order to scale those programs in the future. We aim that those programs are labor market driven, so it's not a charity space what we are talking about, but it's really something that has to be demand driven, so employers can lead the solution and not just give philanthropic funding to humanitarian organization to support the work, but really match candidates that they have the need of. Flexible identification mechanism. Of course, the main problem for refugees is documentation. So how to recognize recognition and identification of candidates and their skills. Fair and equitable access, transparent and financially sustainable. So financial sustainability means that one of the principles that we have is that beneficiary pays. So who are beneficiaries? Beneficiaries are, of course, employers that can benefit of the new workers. Beneficiaries are governments that can have taxpayers instead of vulnerable refugees in a reception center. And beneficiaries can be also candidates that can move and can support their relocation. Practical facilitation measures, and of course, monitoring and evaluation, but I will deep dive about it and the impact that we are having. So as I mentioned, Talent Beyond Boundaries is the organization that I work for, and is the first organization and the main organization at the global level at the moment that would like to be the enabler of the system to really support the growth of labor mobility programs for refugees worldwide. And the mission is really to providing a safe environment for displaced persons and refugees. So we are not only talking about recognize candidates with the refugee status determination, but also displaced people more broadly speaking, to utilize their professional skills in rebuilding their lives with dignity and determination. The organization aims to create jobs that match qualification of skilled refugees seeking to provide a sustainable and durable solution for themselves and hopefully their families. We are working through a global ecosystem of partners. So refugee labor mobility is not a one-off program, but it's really a group of organizations and partners that are supporting the growth of programs, supporting candidates for their relocation, for their movement, for their integration in hosting countries, as well as their upskilling and reskilling and trainings where they are. From the other side, as I said, it is the first time that employers and companies and the private sector can really play a role to be a solution for candidates and solution for refugees relocation. So this is just some selected employers that have been working through our programs in different countries, and they are really part of the movement that we are building. One of the members of the Global Task Force on Refugee Labor Mobility is the International Organization of Employers, which is the main global organization and association of employers and private companies that is really driving the solution together with us. So how do we do it? And how do we find candidates with skills? We are working with the tool that is called the Talent Catalog. Talent Catalog is an open source and a free tool that is developed by Talent Beyond Boundaries, but also used by different organizations at source that count now more than 134 candidates already registered, which is a dynamic software, basically a big database of diverse skills of displaced people and their professional competencies, work experience, and so on. That really is the main database that where employers can source their candidates. It's a tool that is in place since 2016, so it has shown a real growth in the number of registration. Every candidates can just register by themselves, and we do, when we can, a vetting process to verify the profiles of candidates that have been registered. It's a tool that, as I mentioned, is used by different organizations, and it's the first of this gender kind of tool. The easiest way to understand is that what's happening when there is a displacement crisis, so a refugee crisis, where people are forced to flee from their countries. The normal kind of request that the international community is asking them is what you need. So, and normally the need is food, shelter, and whatsoever. So the response is a kind of humanitarian. So the founders of Talent Beyond Boundary, which was one of it was a tech person that wanted to hire a Syrian refugee in his company in Australia, and he couldn't do it at that time, 2014-15, after the Syrian crisis. Was thinking, okay, why do we only ask to people what do you need and not who you are, who you were before, what are your skills, what are your profession, what are your dreams for the future, and leverage those skills, profession, abilities, and competencies in order really to move forward and rebuild their life in a country where there is safety. And that's why he built the talent catalog that is now used and count more than, as I said, 134 registered professionals with skilled trades workers, professional services, medical professionals, nurses, doctors, engineers, IT professionals, and so on. A quick snapshot of the talent catalog. The first beta test was done in the Middle East, so that's where the majority of candidates are from: Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, as it was born after the Syrian crisis. So top nationalities are Palestinian, Syrians, but then increasingly Afghans, Sudanese, Venezuelans at the majority of the countries. Still, there is a gender bias in the data that we have, as more male are registered than female, and the key sectors are healthcare, construction, technology, engineering, and consulting. So how the process works? So after the registration, which is the first step that all candidates have to undertake in order to show their CVs, basically, so to prepare their presentation to potential employers. As soon as we have job opportunities in the potential destination countries and the pathways is open, we can browse through the talent catalog. We do have a first contact to evaluate with the candidates if the opportunity match with their skills and it fits for their purpose. So if they're willing, for example, to move to that destination countries, and we are able to shortlist candidates and to submit a shortlist to employers to facilitate interviews with employers. So we normally support employers in doing training to understand the background of refugees in order to interview a refugee which is not already in the country where they live, but is still in the first country of asylum. So to understand better how to read the CV of a refugee that might lack some points here and there or experiences or whatever. And from the other side, we support candidates as well in order to be able to undertake an interview with an international employers in a destination countries or in Western countries. So as soon as there is a job offer, we support them for the visa application. Normally visas, we go through that in a minute, are work visa, so work-related visa, different kind of visa, and they relocate, and we support companies in their relocation projects. So eligibility criteria, generally speaking, of course, we are talking about candidates that have more than 18 years old, but they can be supported by their family, so they can come in according to the different programs with their families at the same time with the principal applicants, or just after a while with the family reunification process. They have to be refugees, stateless, or individual displaced from their home countries, and they have to be unable to return permanently in their country of origin because they will face danger, any way of danger they can. So we are not bounded by the Geneva Convention, but we are also taking into account, for example, Palestinians. We are taking into account, for example, environment displacement and so on. And they not have to have currently another solution to their displacement. So normally they don't have access to citizenship or permanent residency where they are at the moment, or they are not allowed to work where they are. So these are the criteria, generally speaking. Of course, each government pathway has its own specific criteria regarding skills, regarding regulated professions, and so on, that should be taken into account. Those are the programs globally where we are actually working. So the main programs are Canada, UK, and Australia. We did have a well-run program in the US that has just been cut off by the new administration, as well as we are increasing our programming in the EU, actually working in 7 European countries. In yellow, you see source countries that are currently the countries where we are able, through our teams or together with other partners that are using the talent catalog as we use it, in order to source the candidates that can match the skills of the employers at the destinations. So I will deep dive a little bit on the programs, but before doing it, just to break a little bit of the ice, do you have any question about what I've just said? Do you have any curiosity or something that is not clear as I express it? I don't know, Daniela, if it's possible to do just a little break before moving forward in order to understand if everything is clear.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniele. I guess we still have 40 minutes. So yeah, maybe let's see if yeah, there are some questions actually in the chat, and I also see an hand raised. So if you would like to have a little break, it is possible. The risk is that everybody leaves, so maybe better to collect some questions now.
I will collect the questions, yeah. Adama, would you like to?
I see Adama Gatkek, and there is also a question by Aminata in the chat. The problem, Adama, is that we can't hear you properly. If you try to get closer to the microphone, maybe.
Yes. Good morning, Professor.
Hi.
We are learning a lot through these interactions. I'm grateful for this lecture. However, I just have a question for Professor Albanese. That is with regards to these pathways that have been devised or galvanized. When it comes to eligibility criteria, and a party or a person feels that his or her rights have been infringed with regards to especially not being admitted timeously, or not being, or for instances wherein due processes have not been adhered with regard to determination of their eligibility criteria. Are there any forms of judicial review processes in order to get the party redress?
Yeah, if I well understood, because the connection wasn't good, you've been asking if there is a form that you that the refugee can fulfill in the country where they are in order to be ready as soon as there is a job offer to be able to depart from this pathway. Is that correct?
No, the question is with regard to whether there are judicial review processes if a party feels that his or her rights in the determination of his or her eligibility criteria have been infringed.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Got it. Can we collect the question and then I will answer all together?
Yes, please. There is Gatkick. Gatkick, I'm really sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, better. Try now.
Okay. Yeah, my question is going to be very short and brief. It's based on the eligibility criteria on the organizations presented by Daniele. I would ask about those who are politically affected in their countries who could seek for political asylum or for political protection. So now they don't have a permanent base to I mean they may sometimes disagree with a certain regime in system or the incumbent government that may target them politically, so they have to leave the country and look for internal protection. But what if that regime is changed? Because I heard the status could be a permanent a person who could seek a permanent internal protection, who cannot go back to his country or her country. So what of that category? The political asylum seekers who can go back to their country when the regime that target them is changed. Are you in position of also, looking into their issue or not?
Thank you. And then there is a question from Aminata in the chat that is, how do you ensure labor rights of refugees are protected the job market? As you know, many employers may exploit them based on their vulnerability. And there is another question from Maria. Sorry if I missed something. I wonder if these programs are focused on finding local professionals inside the companies that offer employment who are interested in coaching the displaced people to get the job. As I can see from the slides, the refugees might have a great hard skill set, but culturally they might not fit and get dismissed due to these reasons. Is this problem addressed somehow? So let me go through the different questions. So first of all, about there are two questions. One is about judicial review process, and the other one is about exploitation and potential exploitation in countries of destination that are, I think, related to each other. As I said, a complementary labor pathways means that candidates who are the candidates that I mentioned, so refugees and displaced people in first asylum countries, can move thanks to the possibility of having a work-related visa, normally a skilled worker visa in destination countries. So the process, the formal process is the same as everyone else that can move through work opportunities, for work opportunities worldwide. As I mentioned, as an Australian that would like to relocate to the UK. So all the judicial safeguards that are in place for any international workers are also in place for candidates that move through displaced talent pathways. So it is the same. So everyone can apply for judicial review and whatsoever according to the legislation in the country of destination where they are. As well as all those pathways have to respect the work law at destination. So there are normally national contracts that allow employers to sponsor a candidate and a worker that can come and work in their place. So in order to avoid, of course, all the exploitation. What we do additionally to that, which are the normal kind of safeguarding and laws about exploitation that are in place for everyone. It's not only for those programs. What we do is to work alongside with employers in order to ensure that integration is fully taken into consideration, integration concerns, let's say, and community supports within the workplace, but also outside in the community where they are placed, and there is the connection between community sponsorship and labor pathways is fully taken into consideration from employers and local community since the beginning of the programs and since the beginning of any kind of international recruitment that involve refugees somehow. So that's something that has to be taken into consideration since the beginning in order to avoid any form of exploitation at work or abuses of any kind of gender. About the political asylum seekers that Gatcek has mentioned, as I said in the eligibility criteria slides, those programs should and have to be accessible by candidates that have those kind of background as well. So that can be refugees or stateless people, but also any kind of displaced person that have crossed the border and is seeking asylum for whatever reasons, political reasons, but whatever reasons in general, climate reason, as I said, is one of our criteria that, of course, we apply to our candidates in order to be eligible for the programs. As I said, each program and each government has their own criteria that has to be respected. So we are not an organization that can overcome the law of the country where we are working. Of course, what we do advocate with government in order to amplify and to open up pathways and create facilitation for candidates not to be excluded or not to be discriminated just because they are refugees or displaced people somewhere. So equitable access, as I mentioned in the principle and recommendation from the Global Task Force, is one of the key principles that is driving our advocacy worldwide. The equitable access means that candidates that happen to be refugees, stateless, or displaced people wherever in first asylum countries, and they're not able to go back to their country of origin, of course, for safeguarding and safety principles, but also they lack durable solution where they are, meaning, again, in particular, not able to work where they are, but not only, I mean, access to work is one of the criteria, of course, but there are, I mean, other criteria like discrimination, because they can sometimes formally have an access to work, but in practice they are not. They can't because there are some countries where there is a huge population of refugees, or there are poor countries that are hosting refugees that they don't have the means to include a vast workforce in their job market and so on. So those candidates that lack durable solution where they are, even including political asylum seekers and other groups, let's say, of refugees, of course, have to be included in those programs. Maria, sorry, I read it again because I forgot the question. Are focused on funding local procurement inside the company that offer employment. So no, Maria, the programs that I'm talking about are complementary pathways. So in their like broader meaning are pathways that can guarantee durable solution to candidates. So meaning typically candidates that live in first asylum countries, so in the first country of asylum where they seek protection after the displacement, to countries that can guarantee, typically Western countries, but not only, that can guarantee their rights and their protection and a durable solution where they can relocate to. So this is kind of a broad definition. So we are not talking about professionals inside the same company that offer different employment opportunities. We are not talking about refugees that are already in countries where they can have access to work. Like a refugee in Italy normally have access to work. So we are not working with the candidates, not because it's not worth, but because there are a lot of different organizations that are already working on refugee placement and job opportunities for refugees who are already, for example, in Europe. But we are supporting candidates to relocate, as the map is showing, from source countries that are typical the first country of asylum where displacement is huge, to destination countries that offer durable solution to candidates. There is I hope it's clear. ALA, the parliament in the Netherlands proposed the idea of early integration for individuals who have applied for asylum and whose applications are still under review and have experience. The idea is to allow these individuals to be directly employed by workers in the state or private sector without waiting for the result of their application. Does this administrative system exist in Italy as well? So just to be clear again, this apply for candidates that are asylum seekers or refugees in the country of destination. So it's not the candidates that we are talking about. This applies in the vast majority normally of countries in Europe that an asylum seeker can work basically. So according to the different system, like for example in Italy, 60 days, after 60 days, an asylum seeker can work. Normally the candidates, and typically the candidates that we are talking about today, that are candidates of refugee labor mobility, don't apply for asylum, but as I mentioned, are international workers, legally speaking, in the destination countries, are international workers and skilled workers that can come through a skilled worker visa. So they don't have to apply for asylum. Of course, in countries that have signed the Geneva Convention, as all European countries, they can apply for asylum if they want, but they don't have to apply for asylum. So it's not a must, but it's a safeguarding and an opportunity. And they don't apply for asylum because the safeguards are already in place in the programs that are run through what's called labor mobility, where there is a predetermined match with employers, and they normally have access to work from day one. So the narrative that is changing there is that we are not anymore talking about refugees that have to be dependent of humanitarian aid, but from day one, as one of the founder of TVB also mentioned, as soon as a refugee find a job, they are not refugees anymore. They are international workers as everyone else, and it's true in the programs, and even more in front of governments. They are not only not refugees, but also they can be taxpayers as everyone else. So they really can contribute to employers where they work, as every one of us, to the communities where we live, where they live, and to the, of course, the public system as we know it, and the welfare system as we know it in Western countries. So this is the high, really, potential of the refugee labor mobility as we are talking about. I hope that's clear enough at the moment. And don't know, Daniela, maybe you.
Yeah, Daniele, thank you so much for adding another piece to the puzzle of community sponsorship and competing models. So we know more about labor pathways now. I'd like to ask the colleagues in the room 6, Alessia and Prevail, if there are questions from the floor in presence.
Yes.
Yeah, there seems to be, Daniele, you had a lot of success.
I still have some
Yes, we
country-specific slides and impact, but I would like to take the question because I think it's
Thank you. Thank you. This is
important.
really worth it.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
Alessia, when you want.
Yes, yes.
Thank
You
you very
can-
much.
can.
No,
Can
you're
you
mute. Try again, please. Alessia, we
right.
can't, yeah, we
Uh,
can't see the speaker,
Try again, please.
Yeah, my question is regarding the issue of solidarity. And one of the key issues here is my question is about the issue of solidarity. And we are looking at, for instance, issues to do with resettlement and the complementary pathways, and specifically with the talent beyond borders. Apart from these schemes that you provide to refugees and migrants, what other broad programs do you have towards sustainable peace and security? Because this is like addressing the syndromes of migration and refugees. So what is the global interest towards addressing issues of refugees through advocating for durable peace and security across the world and in countries that are affected with wars? And apart from only addressing issues on skill-based approach, what other interests do you have based on refugees' diverse talents and occupations? Because we don't only see refugees as plumbers and people who work in the IT. We have other professionals. We have refugee lawyers. So what programs do you have for incorporating these talents when we talk about inclusion? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you tell us your name? It's
Manasseh Imbe.
Manasseh, yeah. I know it was, I mean, I recognize you from the voice, but I wanted to be sure. Thank you, Manasseh.
Okay, no, thank you very much for great question. So about the first one, I mean, first, a personal opinion. At the moment, what we are currently seeing is a crisis of solidarity worldwide, not only about refugees, but generally speaking about wars and what is happening in front of our eyes every day in different crisis zones. Without mentioning Gaza, Sudan, Venezuela, Iran, Congo, and so on. So there is a big crisis of the multilateral guarantee system that we have been seeing in the last years, at least trying to work towards a world of peace that is not functioning anymore. bilateral agreements, bilateral discussion, and increasing wars. So that's a concern, as well as what we are seeing about the cuts of the humanitarian aid funds. That has been the biggest cuts ever that we as humanitarian community were facing. So there is a currently ongoing a crisis of solidarity. So major UN entities are facing cuts in different ways, so staff cuts, project cuts, and so on. UNHCR and IOM had to let out like thousands of staff members in their organization. So it's the biggest crisis ever of the UN system after the Second World War, as I see it, as well as the cuts of, as I said, on resettlement and humanitarian mission program. That's the landscape that unfortunately we are seeing, and I am personally, of course, concerned about it. As Talent Beyond Boundaries, our core mandate, it is to work, and the only objective of the work that we do have is to work on refugee labor mobility. So we support UN agencies, we support the work of other NGOs, but we don't want to duplicate the work that others are already and currently doing quite well. So the mandate of the organization is not to do as like a generic humanitarian organization. So there was no need in 2015 to have another additional humanitarian organization supporting refugees, but like, for example, after the Ukraine crisis, we were supporting other NGOs that were already doing a quite well done work. So there wasn't the need to create a new organization to do that. I personally, coming from other humanitarian organizations that are currently working and supporting refugees worldwide, so there is no need to do another organization to do that. And the specific aim of TBB is really to expand and make labor mobility work for refugees as a solution for more and more candidates worldwide. So there is a kind of specificity of the work that we would like to do by supporting also other organizations in doing what they do, like durable solution for refugees, humanitarian aid, and whatever is needed to support refugees. What we do, as I said, is additional to others. So there, just to be clear, there was a global need for such an organization that have one core mandate to support that could be the enabler of the system to drive this solution forward for more candidates worldwide. I hope that is clear enough. So that doesn't mean that we are not supporting, of course, refugees or peace creation and so on, but there are also other organizations, and specialization even in the humanitarian world is essential for what I see. In particular, because we want to bring at the table, and it's one of the aims that is clear, private sector not as a donor of humanitarian charity philanthropic way, but really to be part, that can be part of a solution. So including refugees at work as a durable solution where they are, and to move for labor opportunities can be really a transformative solution that in the future can be even for more and more thousands of people that can find a way out of their displacement. So I hope that this answers the question that you make about the global lack of solidarity. Second question about diversity of professions. Yes, we do have different programs and pipelines about different professions. So I mentioned some of them, but actually, like the example that you mentioned about the legal and paralegal workers, we do actually have a program that is called Displaced Legal Talent Initiative, for example, that is aiming to support legal and paralegal refugees to relocate for work in legal firms, whatever, in the global stages. We are partnering with one of the major global firms on migration, that is Fragomen, which is part of the Global Task Force as well. And there are other legal firms that are supporting candidates to do that. This is about legal, but we are currently leading a coalition on green skills pathways, for example. So it's more on related on electricians profession, green skills economy, so automotive, electrical cars, and retrofitting and whatever is related to the green economy. So it's a specific sectoral initiative, as well as we are doing, like, for example, in Italy, we are running a program on goldsmith, so jewelry making, and for people that have competencies in handicrafts. We are running a program on airport operators, so different candidates that can work in airports that will arrive in Italy to do that. IT programs, as I mentioned, nursing and healthcare is one of the major programs that we do have. So the diversity of profession is there. Of course, we want to deep dive into different pipelines and to be able to open pathways for more and more candidates with different professions. I hope that this can clarify better the position. I will move forward a little bit by deep dive a little bit into different programs, country level programs. Starting from Australia. Australia is the chair. So the Australian government is the chair of the Global Task Force on Refugee Labor Mobility. And we do have an agreement, and there is an ongoing program, which is the Skilled Refugee Labor Agreement, as a pilot program that the Australian government pledged to make it a permanent program soon. So we hope that with the new presidency in Australia can be like really put forward as a permanent program in there. One of the key elements of the Australian program is that there is a trusted partner agreement with Talent Beyond Boundaries, that is the trusted partner of the partner of employers and the governments in order to support the relocation of candidates and to verify the profile of candidates. A particularity of the Australian program is that the 60% of the candidates are what we call the autonomous access. So that means that candidates can get a job through a normal skilled worker visa and can apply for a job if they find an employer that have the opportunity to hire them. And if they find an employer without any kind of intermediation of TBB or any other organization, they can come through the process and be supported by us. And in a couple of months, normally, they can go through through the process. It's very interesting because it's very scalable. We are known out there as to be the LinkedIn of refugees. So in the way that to create a marketplace where the talent catalog is, where candidates that are that happen to be refugees and employers that have a shortage and a vacancy open can match themselves, and we just can support their relocation through to some countries. Top hiring industries are, of course, IT, mechanical engineer, healthcare, butchers, and skilled trades in general, and finance and administrations. Canada, I know that you did deep dive about their humanitarian mission program just before my intervention. There is another program in Canada, which is one of the champion of safe and legal pathways in general in the world, which is a new program that is called the Mobility Pathways Pilot, again, the EMPP. So it's a very typical and well-functioning program that combines humanitarian and mission program that I think that you deep dive right before, with the normal skilled migration visa programs, and combine the two together in order to have a streamlined process that can support candidates to relocate. They normally have facilitation that are typical for candidates and displaced people. Like, for example, a valid passport is not required, but a vet process through trusted partners. TPP is one of them, but there are 4 other organizations that are working in Canada in order to make the EMPP work, that are trusted partners and can go through the process. There is no need for a formal registration with UNHCR or URVA. There's, of course, a need of work experience that is normally checked by us and the other organizations that are working for the pathway. But there is no valid residency or legal status in the host countries where they are. So that means that candidates don't have to be registered, don't have to be a valid status where they are, because we all know that in some countries they don't recognize refugees or that they don't have a valid status. Is one of the biggest up and running program globally. The UK, we are running through together with the Home Office, so the Ministry of Interior of the UK, a displaced talent mobility pilot program. Again, even the UK and the new administration pledged, and it's written in the last white paper of the UK government that has been released like a month ago, that the displaced talent mobility program should become and will become a permanent pathway. So there are ongoing discussion on how to shape the new pathway. It's going to be under the more broadened sponsorship program, or it's going to be a dedicated pathways for skilled workers. And again, there are facilitation. One of the main and major facilitations that we do have in the UK is that formally there is a visa in 5 days, which is a huge advantage for any employers to get a visa in such a short-term period. So as soon as there is a job matching and a validation from TVB, the processing time is very short, sometimes even 2 days to get a visa, which of course is a major advantage for anyone involved in the process. A snapshot of Europe. So as always, we don't have a European program, even if we are working under a displaced talent mobility program as TVB, but there are 7 different programs in 7 different European countries. The major one at the moment are Belgium, Ireland, Italy, Germany, and it's ongoing the work in France, Spain, and Slovakia, where we are opening pathways to candidates. Unfortunately, today I cannot be there with you at the university because I will depart later on for Spain in order to work on a policy design session with some regions and government authorities and employers in specifically in Spain. I will not go through details about different programs because it's going to be too long, but of course, happy to take some questions. I will deep dive a little bit on Italy, just because, of course, we are in Italy and it might be of interest what Italy is doing. So there is a coalition of different organizations, UNHCR, Pathways International, Diaconia Valdese, Italian Beyond Boundaries, and some employers that, by the way, have signed an agreement with the Italian government, Ministry of Labor, Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Interior just last Friday on labor pathways for refugees in Italy. And what we are using, which is the particularity of Italy at the moment, we are using a skilled worker visa channel, which is a new one opened by the Law 50/2023, with the name that we call train to hire. So that implies a possibility for candidates to be hired in Italy by a company who accomplished a training before departure that is pre-approved by the government and Italian authorities. So candidates that can go through a process can apply for a work visa as soon as they have a job offer, which is a very interesting new pathway that is being opened in Italy, and it is and also other European countries are exploring together with the European Commission. Because of course the training before the departure, which is just an upskilling of candidates, can support candidates to pre-learn the language, of course Italian language in the case of Italy, and to be checked with their competencies and to be trained in order to fulfill the gap that they might have in technical competencies in the workplace. Countries of departure at the moment are worldwide. In particular, we do have 4 projects that have already pre-approved in the goldsmith sector, as I mentioned, from Jordan, in the IT sector in Uganda, in the shipbuilding sector in Egypt, and the airport operators in Colombia. And the training is ongoing in these days. We do have other 3 projects that are under approval on the healthcare sector. I'm sorry, it's in Italian, so I didn't translate this one, but on the healthcare sector for Ecuador, on the drivers and truck drivers and bus drivers from Cameroon, and in the agri-food sector from Lebanon. We do also work with in the let's say together with colleagues and organizations that are working on humanitarian corridors, where the selection is based, as I said, on vulnerabilities, but can integrate the skills approach and selection also in the humanitarian corridors program. So we are currently exploring collaboration in Turkey and Jordan in particular. So just a couple of pictures of the one of the programs, which is the Ready for IT program, which is a training that happened in Uganda, in Kampala, with refugees coming from 6 different countries. They were Java developer. The majority of them is already relocated to Italy, working in 7 different employers worldwide in Italy. So the training is normally composed by a technical training, in this case backend Java and SQL, language training to bring the candidates at least to A1 level, and a candidate support, a different kind of support of candidates before departure, as well as what we call My Employer and I, so a community matching that can happen before departure, and that's where the overlapping between community sponsorship and labor pathway. So technically it is a labor pathway, but of course it has a component within the workplace and again in the community where candidates will live and are living, to support them for their integration, friendship, and whatever. Few numbers about the global programs. One of the numbers that we normally highlight with employers is the retention rate. So retention rates in our programs is more than 90% after the first year. So that means that candidates remain in the same workplace with the same employers in the long term, which is worth the investments of employers. This number is not just because TBB works well, but it's because candidates are really worth the investment. Their trust of the candidate, of the country that supported them, and the employer that helped them to find a new way for their life and their protection, it's something that is really incredible. And normally employers are very satisfied about the programs. we could relocate almost 3,000 candidates worldwide through labor mobility pathways and secure durable solution in the countries that I've already listed before. 361 are the employers that extended job offers to candidates worldwide, with 121 employers that extended more than one job offer to candidates. That extended job offer for more than one candidate, so multiple candidates hiring. 95% of candidates feel welcome in their new community, which is a very interesting rate, as well as almost 90% of candidates can send remittances to their families abroad after the first year of arrivals. Employers who rate candidates' technical skills level today as meeting their role requirements are normally average and above average, almost 90%. So that means that we already demonstrate that refugees have skills that can be really leveraged to rebuild their life. And 94% of employers are likely to recruit displaced talent again through TBB and partners. An employer survey demonstrates that companies are liking the programs as soon as they can get on board. 97% of companies that rate candidates' technical skills and soft skills as satisfactory or better, which is a high number. And at the question, will you hire again? Those are some answers that we could get. Is in March this year, we did a global employer survey, and some sentences are just like key executives are passionate about this initiative. So passion and involvement of staff members and employees is essential. It's been such a positive and exciting experience for us, as well as depends on cost and roles alignment with our needs. Of course, one of the key considerations for employers is not just, again, it's not a charity program or a social responsibility program of companies, but it's really an HR program. So refugees that have to meet the requirements of the employer. And I would leave you this tool to, if you want to deep dive about refugee labor mobility in general. It is the Displaced Talent Hub. Displaced Talent Hub is the repository of the program worldwide that has been developed by TBB, but for the Global Task Force on Refugee Labor Mobility. And it is a way to centralize diverse resources, to learn from doing, and to scale the solution at the global level that requires knowledge sharing and partnership. So you will see in the website, if you are interested, some of the points that I've already mentioned today, but also you can deep dive into specific pathways and so on. So with the policy process and some advices for stakeholders. I just want to conclude by saying that we normally say to employers that is not, or to employers and to stakeholders in general, also with governments and other community-based stakeholders, that is the smart thing to do and the right thing to do. The smart thing to do, it is because it can give access to an untapped source of talent, resilience and determined candidates that have passed through displacement, and a strong loyalty and high retention, as we demonstrate by data. But also it's the right thing to do because it can lift a person and their family out of displacement, can achieve diversity goals with high caliber candidates, and can build different staff morale and positive association with the company brand. Of course, so diversity and inclusion tools. And this is my email if you would like to reach out and have more questions, but I'm happy. I think that we still have some minutes, Daniela, to take some more questions if there are.
Thank you so much, Daniele, and congratulations for creating, rooms for this impressive hub of talents all around, for refugee talents all around the world. It's really a precious contribution to our Summit Training School and to the debate around legal complementary pathways and community sponsorship. I'm also glad to announce that in the autumn, we are going to host at Tusha University a big conference, which will host also the multi-stakeholder roundtable on community sponsorships. Of course, Daniele is going. I really hope to have him back again in autumn for this final conference. And it's important to raise attention around those topics and to change the narrative also about, integration and inclusion. The last slide you presented is very telling of the possibility to make it a win-win solution and to present it as a win-win solution. This is exactly what we are trying to do from different perspectives, the operational and stakeholder perspective, and from the academic one. So thank you so much for your contribution. Let's see if there are any questions. I know that it's a little bit tiring, the whole morning of teaching for the students, especially in Viterbo, because it's extremely warm, as you know. I mean, the 1st of July. So let's see. I don't see actually hands raised. Okay, so I would say that we can stop for now, and of course we will have a chance to continue this debate with Daniele in different venues. So thank you very, very much for being with us. And before everybody leaves, I just want to make some technical announcement. First of all, I want to thank
Thank you very much on my side as well, Daniela,
Thanks.
colleagues and students to attend this meeting. Of course, I hope to be able to come in presence in October.
Great. We will wait for you. Thank you. Have a nice day, Daniele. Before everybody leaves, I just want to thank warmly Alessia and Prevail for perfectly leading the morning session from Aula 6 in San Carlo. Thank you, guys. Very much appreciated. And I would like to inform everybody that we will resume the training session at 2. We have duly received and noted your draft policy papers. And the trainers for the afternoon session have already read it and have already provided the first evaluation. Of course, is a first evaluation, provisional one, because you are supposed to complete the drafting in the first part of the afternoon training session. And then we are going to have a plenary session from 2:30 to 4:30. The plenary session is going to last 2 hours. Each group is going to have 20 minutes for the presentation and the discussion. So 10 minutes for the presentation and 10 minutes for the discussion. The presentation is going to be done by the group leader, while during the discussion, we will evaluate the participation of all the components of the group. So it's not an individual task of the group leader. All the components of each group are supposed to take the floor, raise questions, intervene, participate, be interactive. If they don't do so, the entire group is going to be penalized. So please get ready to take the floor this afternoon. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you very much. And good luck for the training session. And I'll see you in an hour or so. See you later. Bye.
Okay, bye, Professor.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.